The origin of life. I almost feel the room shake when I utter this near magical phrase. A short time ago I reviewed a terrific book on this subject, Nick Lane's The Vital Question, which examines the topic from the point of view of a biochemist, which seems like just the right orientation from which to approach the question. The transition from lifeless chemicals to the most simple forms of life requires biochemical events. Short of life arriving in complete form from some extraterrestrial source, Athena springing from the head of Zeus seeming an excellent metaphor for that scenario, it's hard to imagine a terrestrial origin that doesn't involve biochemistry. After all, whatever else it may be, life is a container of chemicals. In reviewing Nick Lane's book, I mentioned that there was another book on the origin of life that absolutely blew my mind, and that's the book I want to talk about today. Addy Pross, professor of chemistry specializing in chemical reactivity, has a fresh angle on the problem in his book, What is Life? How Chemistry Becomes Biology. Boy, I would love to hear someone like Nick Lane discuss Pross's book, because while I'm an interested and fascinated layman, months after reading the book, I'm still thinking that Pross has added something worthwhile and important to this most fundamental of questions. In Pross's view, we lack an adequate theory of what life is, and therefore can't give adequate answers to some of the central questions in biology. What are the principles at work in abiogenesis, the emergence of life from inanimate chemical building blocks? What principles guide life's errant defiance of the second law of thermodynamics, the demand that systems tend toward maximum disorder? How is it that life, which behaves as if it has purpose, could have come about in a universe without purpose? A complete summary of Pross's ideas is too much for a short video, but I'm going to concentrate on the core concept, one with which I had previously been unfamiliar. He argues that despite efforts to identify the historical origin of life some 4 billion years ago or so, ocean thermal vents, the clay template hypothesis, primitive redox reactions across proto-membranes, it is likely that we'll never have conclusive answers about these matters. The more knowable and more important matter is the principles that are at work in the establishment of life and in propelling it from the simple toward complexity. The movement from the simple to the complex, along with its organization, are among the most fundamental characteristics of life from a chemical point of view. Life persists despite, by its very nature, opposing the principle that guides all physical systems: the thermodynamic tendency to move toward maximum disorder, toward a state of maximum stability, toward the endpoint of reactivity. This is the principle captured in the second law of thermodynamics, which holds that the total entropy of any isolated system cannot decrease over time. The explanation has always made sense. Systems like life can oppose the thermodynamic imperative as long as they have an input of energy from outside that powers the opposing tendency toward disorder. What Pross has done is to detail how life gets around the second law of thermodynamics without violating it, and in so doing he elaborates explanatory chemical principles that illuminate the nature of life. The proposal here is that there is a fundamental chemical principle that allows life to perpetuate itself despite the inexorable requirement of the second law. His idea comes out of the field of chemical systems, specifically replicating systems. Replication is fundamental to life. Life makes copies of itself. The genetic code is copied and recopied billions of times a day. Every protein in every cell is replaced in a perpetual process of making more and more of the chemicals of life. The better at replicating, the more persistent life is over time. Replicating systems are stable in the sense of persisting, not by reaching an endpoint of chemical reactivity as in classical chemical reactions. For example, in a classical spontaneous chemical reaction, a system moves from a state of higher energy to a more stable lower energy state, releasing free energy in the process. A roaring bonfire is a great example in that it releases energy, and the end products like carbon dioxide, water vapor, and ash are more thermodynamically stable than the starting products wood and oxygen. This can be viewed as a kind of static stability. But instead, replicating systems, systems that reproduce themselves, in other words, systems like life, are stable when they are powerfully able to sustain the activities of replication. In this way, living systems have a different kind of stability than do conventional chemical reactions. Pross calls this kind of stability dynamic kinetic stability. A waterfall supplies a visual example. It's a system that persists through the constant turnover of its materials, water, and the ongoing energy supply that comes from the conversion of potential to kinetic energy. The stability of the system is maintained through constant change. The physical and chemical components of life are constantly undergoing replication, reorganization, and interaction with each other. Life is a constantly changing system. Like a waterfall, life is driven by the stability that comes with replicative chemistry, and greater efficiency and power of its replicative processes lend greater stability to the biological systems we call life. These ideas come out of a field of chemistry called systems chemistry, which focuses on complex chemical systems as a whole, rather than on individual parts alone. And it seeks to observe and predict how molecules increase in complexity over time. In systems chemistry, dynamic kinetic stability drives the complexification of molecules. And Pross believes that this process of complexification is precisely what's going on as life evolves from simpler to more complex forms. In this way of seeing things, natural selection, which is the engine of the continual diversification of living organisms, is an outcome of events driven by the dynamic kinetic stability that maintains the stability of life. Pross's book, while challenging and full of complicated ideas, actually builds slowly and clearly, each step in his project clearly explained before moving to the next. The essence of his idea is that a distinction between chemistry and biology is misleading. Biological systems are a form of organized and complexifying replicative chemical systems. He offers his own reworked definition, which I'll read. Life is a self-sustaining, kinetically stable, dynamic reaction network derived from the replication reaction. Let me repeat that. Life is a self-sustaining, kinetically stable, dynamic reaction network derived from the replication reaction. This is a beautiful addition to our understanding of what is fundamental about life. The book was valuable to me. Are Pross's ideas true? Does systems chemistry offer a new conceptual alternative for thinking about life and its origin? I don't know. Perhaps only time will tell. But if you're interested in the origin of life and you read this book, one of two things will happen. Either you'll come away with some provocative and intuitively appealing ideas about the nature and origin of life, or Pross will challenge you to think clearly about where he's gone wrong, because his ideas are carefully and thoughtfully assembled, grounded in contemporary chemistry, and at the very least demand an equally astute response. I think anyone interested in the big fundamental concepts of biology will find this book fascinating. Be sure to subscribe, you can follow my Instagram, and thanks a lot for watching.